Students are always asking me about hypothesis testing. I get questions every week from students all over the place saying, hey, can you help me with hypothesis testing? So I decided to put this little presentation together. It's going to be probably 5 or 6 videos. I try to keep them small because I make a lot of mistakes and I have to redo videos. So it's time consuming, but if I make them smaller, it helps me a lot. So this hypothesis testing presentation is brought to you by the Stat Cave, which is one guy only, who's out there trying to help you. First of all, why do we do hypothesis tests? We do them to test claims. For example, Bazinga Pizza has a new advertising slogan that says they deliver their pizzas to their customers in less than 32 minutes. How do we test that? We could test that claim by taking a sample, and then we could statistically test the claim by using a hypothesis test. Now, what does it mean as the word hypothesis applies to hypothesis testing? It's simply a statement or claim about a population parameter, maybe a mean, maybe a population mean, maybe a population proportion. Then we have to note a pair of hypotheses. One of these represents the claim, the other its complement. So I've got the claim and I've got its complement, or its opposite. It's important to note, and I will say this many times, is that the claim can be either the null or the alternative hypothesis. When one of these hypotheses is false, the other must be true. And this is, it's confusing because we never, quote, accept a null hypothesis. We either reject it or we fail to reject it. So it's all in the wording. The null hypothesis itself always contains equality, in that the null hypothesis will be either less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. Never will it be anything else. It'll have one of those symbols in it. The alternative hypothesis, on the other hand, will always be either greater than, not equal to, or less than. So, the alternative hypothesis always contains inequality. The null hypothesis always contains equality. Look, this is what it's going to be. A null will have either less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to. An alternative will either have greater than, not equal to, or less than. We call the null hypothesis H sub 0 or H naught. We call our alternative hypothesis H sub A or H sub A, the alternative hypothesis. What do they look like when you are writing these things? Well, I could have the null hypothesis is that the population mean is less than or equal to 3. The alternative would be that it's greater than 3. I could have that the population mean is greater than or equal to 5.3. The alternative is that it's less than 5.3. Notice these both have equality. The alternative has inequality. Or I could have that the population mean is 0. The alternative is that it's not equal to 0. On all of these, we're assuming that the mean is equal to something, or the mean is less than or equal to something, or the mean is greater than or equal to something. You could have this with a p instead of the mu. We're dealing with a proportion. Let's say we have the local community college advertises that the proportion of their students who are involved in community service is 73%. So they're saying that proportion is equal to 73%. In this case, the claim is the null hypothesis. The alternative would be that it's not equal to 73% or 0.73. That's the complement. Bazinga Pizza comes on the radio and claims their average delivery time for pizza is less than 32 minutes. Well, in that case, less than 32 minutes doesn't include the 32. So our claim in this case is actually the alternative hypothesis. What is the complement of that? If it's not less than 32, it's got to be greater than or equal to 32 minutes. However, let's say Bazinga Pizza comes on the radio and claims that their average delivery time for pizza is 32 minutes or less. All right, note how the claim shifts from being an alternative to being a null hypothesis. Okay, so now our claim is that the mean time is 32 minutes or less. So my claim is now the null hypothesis. What is the complement? That it's greater than 32 minutes. So always be really careful on how you look at those. All right. Big Bob's says, Big Box Bob's, I always come up with these names, tongue twisters, says that his mattresses last longer than 10 years. Longer than 10 years. So in this case, he's saying that the mean is greater than 10 years. So he's claiming that it's greater than 10 years. So that's the alternative hypothesis. What's the complement of that? It's that it's less than or equal to 10 years. So be careful on how you read these, because the claim can be either the alternative or the null. The scientist claims that 30% of the population has heard of the new drug. Less than 30%, be careful. So, what would that be? Less than 30% of the population. Oh, that M right there should be a P. Let's fix it. It's always nice when you can go back and stop the video and fix something. The scientist claims that 30%, less than 30% of the population has heard of the new drug. So we're dealing with a proportion here. So he's saying, or she's saying, that the proportion is less than 30%, or less than 0.3. So the claim would be the alternative hypothesis. The complement of that is that it's greater than or equal to 30%. All right. Please note that I have seen some text use an equal sign for the null, either sometimes or all the times. Like, in other words, for this previous problem, they would have noted that the null hypothesis was that it's equal to 0.3. I have no idea which textbooks students are using. As I said, I've got students all over the place that come and say, hey, will you help me with this? Or, hey, could you put something together on this? So sometimes you will see a null hypothesis always use an equal. I can't tell you. You just need to stick with what you know, what you've read, what you've been taught, and always look at getting the claim correct. Let's say that we have a professor who claims that more than half of all students have math anxiety. Well, what that professor is claiming is that the proportion of students is greater than 0.5, greater than half. All right, so the claim would be the alternative hypothesis. What would be the alternative? What would be the null hypothesis? That the proportion, the true proportion, is less than or equal to 50% or 0.5. I'm going to stop right here and start another video just so that these don't get too long.